Welcome to the Committee on Teaching About the United Nations. That's CTON for short. I am Anne-Marie Carlson, Chair of CTON. Today's webinar, Women Leaders and the United Nations, focuses on women who have made or are making an impact. We consider them to be strong women. Strong, not necessarily in the physical sense, but strong in their vision, accomplishments, thoughts, etc. These women that you'll be meeting today are leaders from the past and present, along with those we feel have much future potential. Some have held or are holding important positions. Some are with us here live, both individually or in small groups today, while others have prepared short videos, especially for this webinar. We have chosen several special women leaders, and we want to emphasize that these are only some of the many around. There are many more. These special women will be briefly presented by 8 of our CTON members. We've asked these CTON members to focus on just 1 or 2 reasons why we're focusing on them and not to provide extensive bios. However, you will find some more bio information on each one of them on our CTON website, www.teachun.org, along with resources related to our program. So let's move on to the first of these special strong women who are on the front line of change. Gillian Sorensen. Gillian is the person we've chosen as our first strong woman leader. In addition to her serving as UN Assistant Secretary General, she has guided the New York City government in working with the UN and with many NGOs over the years. CTON has been one of these NGO groups beginning over 20 years ago and continuing on. And recently, she has also focused on refugee assistance at the International Rescue Committee. Her guidance and support have been unparalleled. So we've chosen Gillian Sorensen and are thrilled that she could be with us today. Gillian. Gillian, you have to unmute yourself.
There we are. So thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for that nice introduction and for the honor of joining you and speaking to teachers around the country. And I want to salute and thank what CTON has done over a number of years to bring teachers into a deeper understanding of the United Nations and move us all forward. You asked me to touch on 3 different things. I'll be brief and I hope relevant. I began my own career actually through city government, through the mayor of New York, who named me the head of a small office called the New York City Commission for the United Nations and Consular Corps. It was the city's liaison office with 30,000 diplomats. And we determined back then that we wanted to build bridges, not walls, and to resolve a number of persistent, aggravating issues between the diplomatic community in New York. And the mayor, then Ed Koch, this goes back in time, was very committed to this. He may have had differences with certain countries, but he believed strongly that the United Nations was an important part of the life of New York. And we wanted to make sure that the diplomats here, and not only ambassadors, but the newest, youngest diplomats, were supported, that they had housing, education, and the kind of help that they needed to do their work. Sorry, turn off that phone. I did that for all 12 years of the mayor's terms as leader of New York, and then was recruited by then Secretary General Boutros Ghali to come into the UN. The title was Special Advisor for Public Policy, but the immediate assignment was the planning of the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. And as he said to me, this is more than This is more than a celebration. It is a chance to educate, to inform, and to inspire the world about the reasons for the United Nations. We involved 110 countries in this. We had films, we had books, we had speakers, and a great deal of news coverage. And it was a very special commemorative event and well planned around the world. When Boutros-Ghali's term ended, I was recruited by Kofi Annan, who had just been named Secretary General on his transition team, and then became his Assistant Secretary General for External Relations. Kofi Annan believed, and I shared this, that it was essential that the United Nations be understood not just by diplomats, but by the world at large, by the public. And that included business leaders and religious leaders and students and journalists and so on. And he encouraged me to reach out to those many communities. I was also the touch point for 4,000 accredited NGOs at the UN. So that was a very stimulating time in that role, which I did for 8 years, and then I crossed the street to the UN Foundation and did another 10 or 12 years as their national advocate, giving over time more than 1,000 speeches. I wanted to talk briefly about the role of women. Of course, Eleanor Roosevelt stands out in history, and her contribution at the start of the United Nations, way back in 1946, she came in, was unique. And her important leadership of the first Human Rights Declaration was absolutely critical. And for the rest of her life, she was dedicated to the UN. But the UN did not appoint many other women. And in those days, diplomacy was a man's world. Fast forward in time, I do believe that Kofi Annan was the first Secretary General who really understood and took seriously the importance of appointing women in high places, not just for the look of it, but for what women understood and could do. I've gone back in my memory to bring back some names of women that I thought were really outstanding. One was Kofi Annan's Deputy Secretary General, the first DSG, of course, the first.
Pardon me, Gillian, you've gone on mute.
Shall I back up a moment?
Just from the point of the first appointment.
All right. Kofi Annan's first appointment was Louise Frechette of Canada as Deputy Secretary General. Carol Bellamy as head of UNICEF, Mary Robinson, the President of Ireland, to lead the Human Rights Office, Sadako Ogata from Japan to lead the refugee efforts, Angela Kane from Germany to lead management. In more recent times, there has been.
I apologize, but you're hitting your mute button from time to time here, and you're just back at it again.
There was Valerie Amos of the UK and the Caribbean, who was the head of UN management. And she now, interestingly, is the first female head of University College at Cambridge. They call it the Master of the College. There was Helen Clark of New Zealand, leading UN Development Program, Irina Bokova, head of UNESCO, Susanna Malcora, head of Field Support, Navi Pillay from South Africa, head of Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet of Chile, head of UN Women, and so forth and so on. Some very, very extraordinary, dynamic, courageous, and I think effective women. Women ambassadors were not numerous, but the US did lead out, you might recall, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, Madeleine Albright, but just now, the distinguished Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is the US ambassador, and among the 193 countries, you will find more women now. My final point, let me come back to the importance of teaching the United Nations. Consider this. The US is a powerful country, but we represent only 4% of the population on this earth. 4%. So if you're to understand the rest of humanity, you really have to put your mind in another place. And teaching about the UN, about the Foreign Service, about international relations, about how we are connected to other countries and how issues cross borders without passports, including climate, health, travel, safe travel issues, the consequences of war and conflict and famine, cyber attacks, and more. The US is now in a different place. The Trump administration dismissed and demeaned the United Nations. Biden, I'm glad to say, is putting diplomacy at the heart of his foreign policy and is determined to repair the damage and rebuild our leadership role and hopefully regain our reputation, trust, and credibility. He will end the so-called America First approach, which to me meant America alone or isolated. He will rejoin the Climate Accord, WHO, the Human Rights Council, UN Family Planning, UNESCO, and more, and he will see that the United States pays our dues. In other words, the US is back. I encourage your students to follow these issues. The UN website is excellent. To take debate, to form a model United Nations, to learn how to stand up and speak, in a word, to find their voices. I urge you to encourage them to consider life as a diplomat or as a politician, and to understand the role of the State Department, other countries call it the Foreign Ministry, of course, in connecting our countries around the world. I urge you to encourage them to consider majoring in international relations and starting early, that is now, to master another fluent foreign language or two. This will open the world in a way that nothing else can. If they have a chance to study abroad or serve abroad or join the Peace Corps, that is all the better. With that, I stop and simply say again how deeply grateful I am to all of you teachers for bringing the United Nations into your classrooms and helping your young students understand how important it is. Thank you again.
Next.
And we are deeply grateful to you, Gillian. Thank you so very much.
Audrey Azoulay came to UNESCO in 2017 after having served as France's Minister of Culture. Audrey Azoulay charted a new direction for the organization. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. Audrey Azoulay suggested that rethinking education is the key solution to global challenges. Through quality education, particularly for girls, students can build a new relation to nature, science, the environment, and culture. In this way, UNESCO can contribute successfully to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the creation of peaceful societies. Teachers in the audience will be happy to learn that Phumzile Mlambo Nguka began her career as one of us. Subsequently, she devoted her work to human rights and served as Deputy President of South Africa from 2005 to 2008. Now, she leads UN Women, an organization dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. On International Women's Day, she spoke about the ravages of COVID-19 on women and called for a change in political will to actively and intentionally support women's representation at the heart of decision-making spaces. These would include corporations, governments, and all social, cultural, and economic efforts. And here is my colleague, Joanna Patricis.
Amina Mohammed. Amina Mohammed is the second highest international civil servant in the world, the administrative right hand to the Secretary General. When she took office in 2017, she said, "My job description is simple: to build a world where every girl and boy has the tools and support to make their dreams a reality." She was instrumental in creating the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, SDGs, especially as it relates to ending extreme poverty. She has also advanced policy on climate change to protect the natural environment and conserve resources for sustainable development. In April of 2020, joined by many powerful women leaders, she initiated the Women Rise for All advocacy program, calling the world to action in the fight against COVID-19, especially as it affects women. Her Excellency Linda Thomas Greenfield. The newly appointed U.S. Ambassador, Ms. Thomas Greenfield, has had a most successful 34-year career with the Foreign Service. As Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs, she drafted U.S. policy for sub-Saharan Africa. In her new role as ambassador, her goal is to restore or change America's standing in the world and renew relationships with our allies. Referring to the current world situation, she affirmed that the U.S. will relentlessly push for peace. A Louisiana native, she coined the phrase gumbo diplomacy, inviting diplomats and cooking gumbo stew for them herself. As they enjoy the cooking and the meal, they develop relationships that transcend their differences. This singular style of generosity and hospitality was learned from her mother, who she stated, to lead with compassion for peace. And now my colleague, Grace Murphy, will introduce Michelle Bachelet.
An advocate for human rights of all kinds, Michelle Bachelet is mandated to respond when serious violations to these rights exist. On Thursday this past week, she addressed a special one-day session of the Human Rights Council to discuss the grave situation in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. And only 2 days before that, she decried the violations caused by violence against demonstrators, journalists, and passersby in the Colombian city of Cali. She is also an agent of change. Michelle Bachelet realizes that the hardest thing is to change culture, but she tries by fighting for the rights of women, their economic empowerment, their right to be included in decision-making on all levels, and their right to be free from violence. We are very fortunate to have Ms. Bachelet on video, and I invite you now to listen to her tell you about her life and her ideas.
Dear friends, I'm delighted to participate in this gathering. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on a topic that has been close to my heart throughout my life. When I was a young refugee far from my homeland, struggling to attend medical school in a foreign language, When I returned to Chile and became a medical doctor in poor neighborhoods, often working with the children of torture victims and people who had been disappeared by the dictatorship, when I became my country's Minister of Health, Minister for Defense, and when I was honored to be elected twice as President of the Republic of Chile. Across these decades, I have encountered countless women whose powerful analysis and deep sense of service to others have moved and inspired me. And yet, still today, despite progress in many fields, women in leadership positions still face resistance, suspicion, and hostility based on persistent stereotypes about what supposedly should be their inferior and submissive place in society. From a young age, many girls are taught to doubt themselves and to defer to boys and men. It takes extra willpower, strength, and courage for women to pursue their aspirations and achieve leadership positions. And yet, women have proven over and over again that they are capable of incredible things in all fields. It has been widely noted that a very disproportionate percentage of countries that have made most effectively handled COVID-19 were led by women. Most recently, Australia's Lowy Institute indicated that women head 3 of the top 10 countries and territories in terms of managing the pandemic. Given that women lead just 22 of the UN's 193 member states, that's quite spectacular. They listened to impartial expert advice, they took decisive action in the public interest, and they were effective and compassionate in communicating with the public. I want to encourage young people of all genders to understand that women and girls are naturally fit to excel, to lead, and to make their own choices about their lives. This is also the firm position of the United Nations. Women and girls have equal rights as men and boys. Their empowerment is essential to development, and their participation is key to peace and security. Evidence conclusively demonstrates that when women are included, the peace agreements reached are more likely to be durable. Today, many of us are focused on the urgent crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to push back and rebuild our economies and societies. We need women to help lead that effort. The injustices and inequalities created by discrimination were a major cause of our economic, social, and medical vulnerability to the pandemic. There can be no question of building back the same structures, not just unfair, but which also crumble so easily, causing poverty, pain, and death. To truly recover and create more resilient nations for the future, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for a new social contract to enable young people to live in dignity, ensure women have the same prospects and opportunities as men, and protect the sick, the vulnerable, and minorities of all kinds. This is work that all of us can advance within the United Nations and in our own countries, communities, workplaces, and schools. We need to stand up for change and for human rights.
Hello, I am Laki Musso, and our next spotlight is Ala Murabit, an award-winning medical doctor, global security strategist, and women's rights advocate. Her TED Talk, What My Religion Really Says About Women, has been viewed nearly 5 million times. In it, she tries to change views on the role of women. A recipient of more than 100 honors and awards, Ms. Murabit is one of 17 Sustainable Development Goal advocates appointed by the UN Secretary General. As former Jimmy Carter declared, Ala Murabit is a force for change and a global champion of women's rights. Meg Gardinier, global advocate of women and children's issues, Ms. Gardinier provides strategic leadership, changing the lives of more than 14 million children, their families, and communities in 70 countries. She oversees the Alliance's Child-Friendly Accountability Initiative, holding governments accountable for protecting children from violence. In a world impacted by natural disasters and humanitarian emergencies, our work on behalf of children is more urgent than ever, she says. And she is a founding member of the campaign for US ratification of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Virginia Gamba. Children living in war zones, hungry, deprived of an education, sometimes forced into military service, sexually exploited, kidnapped, or even worse. In January, in a report delivered to member states, Ms. Gamba encouraged governments to change policies and create laws to protect the children, provide for their rehabilitation and reintegration, establish programs to deal with their mental health issues, and protect the workers on the humanitarian aid chain so that the children can receive food and other necessities. She advocates for action plans that keep the best interest of the child in mind. And now I welcome my colleague, Rose Cardarelli.
I have the great honor and pleasure today of introducing two incredible leaders from UNHCR that I personally admire. These amazing women have been effectively changing the world for those less fortunate and really for all of us. Let me share a little perspective. In December 2018, the United Nations General Assembly affirmed the Global Compact on Refugees. That led to the Global Refugee Forum in December of 2019, which translated these efforts into action. I had the privilege of participating in both efforts, so I saw firsthand how these remarkable women brought global entities together for a common purpose. These efforts were huge and were achieved and are still being achieved under the successful leadership of Gillian Triggs, the Assistant Secretary General, Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, and the Assistant Secretary General and the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection. Ms. Triggs oversees the protection of millions of refugees, the internally displaced, the stateless, and other people of concern. She is a PhD, an international lawyer, and one of the most respected experts in the field of human rights, civil rights, equal opportunity, and refugee causes. She is an accomplished author and has many awards, and her achievements span the entire globe. We are honored that you could join us today. So with no further ado, and coming from Geneva, where it's after 8 p.m., Ms. Triggs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rose, and thank you all for including me in this quite extraordinary event. It's such a privilege to be part of this and to hear about these remarkable women. It's wonderful to speak to teachers about the UN because it really matters hugely to me. And before I talk about the substantive topic, and I'll try to be reasonably on time, I thought I'd mention to you that, as a law student, I really was lost in contracts and torts and constitutions and administrative law until I walked into a lecture by a man who escaped the Holocaust, came to Australia, and there I was in his lectures as a young law student, unsure of what I might do with my life. And he talked about something that really underpins everything that I try to do now, and that is the importance of the international rule of law in achieving peace and achieving human rights and gender equality. He talked about the failure of the old League of Nations and his disappointment, and the great hope that he held for the United Nations Charter. And of course, it's now 75 years later, and for me, in the UN Refugee Agency, 70 years since the Refugee Convention was passed. A lot of time has happened since then. A lot of disappointment. Then we had in the years just after the Second World War, we had 2 million displaced people. Today, we have 82 million people forcibly displaced from their homes. So we have a huge challenge before us, and that challenge was met in part, I believe, as Rose has described. We have in the past relied on treaties that are agreed to by sovereign nations, and the obligation is on those sovereign nations to give effect to the unilateral obligations. What was really exciting about the Global Compact on Refugees, and I'm so pleased to know Rose had a role in this, is that it moved, in addition to the individual responsibility of states, the Global Compact on Refugees is one that embarks on a global equitable sharing of responsibilities for refugees. So we have an individual responsibility, but we also have a global responsibility to work to protect refugees and people displaced. And that has been, I think, one of the most exciting things I've ever had the privilege to work on. It is now built on the idea that we not only ensure that refugees have a right to claim asylum and that they are never refooled to a place of persecution and violence, but we now accept that each of us, in our different ways, accepts and shares responsibility in relation to those refugees. This has been, I believe, quite a revolutionary change, and it's been one that I think is important because it's not the standard legal treaty, much as I love the law and love the concept of the rule of law. The Global Refugee Compact is not a technical legal document. It's easy to read. People can read it and understand its concepts quite clearly. We try to keep away from UN language and to make it accessible to everybody. The Global Compact is also not only about individual sovereign states, but is based on the idea of multilateralism. It engages governments, development and humanitarian actors, the private sector, parliaments, cities, civil society organizations, sports and cultural groups, and of course scholars, and most importantly, the voice of refugees themselves. So what has happened is that we have a different approach, a multilateral and cooperative approach towards responding to this extraordinary phenomenon of the movement of peoples, migrants, but also refugees and people who are stateless. So the Global Compact is designed to ease the pressure on host countries. It's a sad fact that 85% of the world's displaced people are hosted by poor or developing countries. And that is the core idea behind the compact. And that is that that responsibility will be shared with others and other wealthier nations around the world. The aim of the compact is also to enhance refugee self-reliance, to enable people to have a livelihood, to have access to education, and to expand opportunities for resettlement, for education, labour mobility in other countries. So it's a framework for cooperation, and lots of techniques have been developed to give effect to it. Perhaps it's important to recognise that the compact is much more than words on a page. It's now got a mechanism for enforcement through pledges that countries are making to assist other countries in dealing with these refugee numbers, the huge responsibility for refugees. I've just come back just a couple of days ago from Bangladesh, where that country generously has hosted for the last 4 years nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees. Turkey has hosted 3.4 or more million refugees from the Syria crisis. And there are many, many other examples across the world. But we'd like to broaden that base of shared responsibilities. But critically too, we'll be judged by the end of this year with a high-level officials meeting that will look at how these pledges, how the idea of sharing responsibility globally has actually been met in practice. So there'll be we'll have various evidence-based indicators that will establish a program of action. So what is next? We have many ideas, but one of the great challenges, and one that Michelle Bachelet has mentioned in particular, is the challenge of emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of the pandemic on all vulnerable people all over the world, but perhaps especially refugees who are in the informal economy, has been social and economic. And we hope that we can meet that challenge over these coming months, and most particularly to demonstrate the importance of sharing by ensuring that vaccines are available all over the world to all vulnerable people, and especially those who are refugees and asylum seekers and stateless people. So with those very few comments, I hope. I'd now pass, if I may, to my colleague, Paveen, who has in fact been engaged with UNHCR far longer than I have, and is very much engaged in ensuring that the vision of the compact is achieved in practice. Thank you very much.
Ms. Triggs, your words continue to inspire all of us for all the great work that you're doing. And so I'll now introduce Ms. Praveen Ali, who is joining us also from Geneva. She's a senior policy advisor at UNHCR. Ms. Ali leads the multifaceted Global Compact on the Refugee Coordination Team. She holds a PhD in law from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is someone that I can predict you'll see again on the world stage, making a global difference for all of those that are in need. Ms. Praveen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rose, for those kind words, and also for inviting us here to speak today. I think maybe just reflecting a little bit on what Jillian was just saying about what brought her to this place. I think the opportunity to organize the first Global Refugee Forum was a really exciting and pivotal moment in my own professional experience, but also I think in the trajectory of the development of the UNHCR and the international refugee legal regime. Within the Global Compact on Refugees, of course, there are many, the compact sets out a vision for how, so many more stakeholders and groups and actors in society can come together to really help share the responsibility for refugees, to ensure that they can get access to protection and assistance and solutions that they need, to ensure that those countries that in the developing world that host more than 85% of the refugees get the support they need to ensure that their host communities and the refugees whom they are supporting have access to basic services and are able to live in safety and in dignity. So how the big question that we faced in the development of the Global Compact was how we would be able to put those ambitions into practice. How could we bring a number of different stakeholder groups together to think about how the international community could really make good on the promise of the Global Compact and to deliver on these ambitions. And it was agreed in the consultations on the development of the Global Compact that an effective way to do so would be to organize a global refugee forum every 4 years at the ministerial level. The idea is that at this gathering, states and other stakeholders, many of whom were mentioned by Jillian previously, would gather to announce concrete pledges and contributions that they would be making towards the objectives of the compact. So they could make policy commitments or financial commitments or material and technical support commitments. And it would be an opportunity for them to share good practices, to think about how they could amplify promising practices and how they can build on lessons learned in developing more coordinated and comprehensive responses to refugees. The first Global Refugee Forum was then held a year after the Global Compact on Refugees was affirmed. It was held in 2019. It was co-hosted and co-convened with a number of countries. There were more than 200 co-sponsors from a number of different stakeholder groups who came in to support specific themes such as education, jobs and livelihoods, solutions, and others. There were more than 3,000 participants at the forum itself, including heads of state, ministers, many from the private sector, development actors, international financial institutions. We had more than 70 refugees and a number of academics. And it was the first gathering of its kind, really, where all of these different actors were able to come together and actually engage in a conversation and produce some meaningful outcomes that they could really use to help make the Global Compact on Refugees a reality in the lives of refugees and the communities that host them. And as a result of this, there were more than 1,400 pledges were made by these different actors. And a number of pledges were also made, I should say, as well, for resettlement and other pathways to safety. We had several billion that were committed by a number of governments, development actors, and international financial institutions. We had a very good pledge from all UN agencies. It was called the UN Common Pledge on the inclusion of refugees in their programming. So, and we had a number of significant law and policy pledges. A number of host countries came forward and pledged to develop policies that would be more inclusive and ensure the protection of refugees on their territories. And we had around half of the pledges were made by governments and half by other stakeholders. So it was really quite a significant and groundbreaking event in a number of ways. It was the first time everyone was able to come together around the table, so to speak, to really make these kind of commitments and to think about how they can work together. And since that time, we've been working with all of these different groups to think about how they can really put their pledges into practice and translate them into concrete action on the ground. This, of course, has been severely challenged by the pandemic, which happened not only a few months after the first Global Refugee Forum, but a number of governments and other actors really stepped up to try to meet the challenge. Some of them adjusted and adapted the pledges they made so that they would support the response to the pandemic, such as including refugees in national healthcare systems, or giving refugees access to remote education opportunities, or recrafting loans into grants from development actors. And so I think it was a really promising, these were really promising examples of how the Global Compact and refugees can change the way that we do business to help us to be more prepared, more coordinated, more comprehensive in the way we respond to refugee situations. And as Jillian mentioned, now we're moving towards the high-level officials meeting in December, where we will really have the first opportunity to take stock of progress since that first forum and see how we've done in implementing the pledges. We've received a lot of updates, and more than 3/4 of the pledges for which that have been updated are reported as being in progress, which is promising, and we're hoping to advance on that further. We're also thinking about, as we look to the future and look to the next Global Refugee Forum that we have in 2023, how we can bring more actors to the table, how we can bring more members of the private sector, what kinds of innovative approaches to partnerships and solidarity can we develop? How can we strengthen whole of government approaches, bringing together the humanitarian and development side of governments to address refugee situations in a coordinated way? And how can we leverage regional arrangements? There were a number of support platforms that were developed as a result of the Global Compact to really bring different governments together to try to encourage and develop solutions and support in a number of refugee contexts. And finally, what we really hope to do is strengthen as well the data collection and analysis, which is so key to providing the evidence base that we need, that is necessary for further policy development to include and protect refugees, and also to inform where we need to direct our efforts in the future as we look towards the development of pledges for the next Global Compact on refugees. So I think I'll just conclude by saying that I think this forum was a unique moment, not only in that it brought together a number of different actors and stakeholders in a way that had not been done before, and I think at a scope that we had not seen before. It also placed refugees at the center. They were very much part of the decision making. They were at the table. And it was, I think, a particularly effective moment because it did have a follow-up mechanism put in place. So this was not a one-off pledging conference where we would hope that everyone would deliver on their commitments, but we actually have a whole mechanism in place that's set out in the Global Compact to make sure that the governments and the different stakeholder groups who made pledges have the support and they need to be able to make those promises a reality on the ground. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about that experience, and thank you very much, Rose.
Your Excellencies, Jillian and Perveen, thank you so much for joining us so late in your day and informing us about the incredible work that you're both doing to make the world a better place for all of us. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you. And we will now go to my colleague, Elizabeth Schuman.
Thank you, Rose. My name is Elizabeth Schuman, and it is a great pleasure for me to spotlight the three remarkable women How do you feed 86 million people a year? Ask Corinne Woods, the Director of Communications for the World Food Program. The World Food Program is the leading humanitarian organization fighting hunger worldwide, delivering food assistance in emergencies, and working with communities to improve nutrition and build resilience. It was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year. Corinne works to enhance the visibility of the organization, support fundraising, and connect with the media. Her vision for the future is a world where all the world's resources will be used to feed children. She feels it would unite us. Corinne had the opportunity to help her vision become a reality as she was part of the team that crafted the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN agenda for creating a better world, in part by eliminating hunger. As you know, Sustainable Development Goal 2 is no hunger. How do you bring the concept of the Sustainable Development Goals to the people in your region of the world? You start and lead an organization that engages people in their own local communities to participate in the sustainable development process. Rosaria did exactly that. She started the Millennials Movement, a social media youth-led movement involving hundreds of young people in Peru who reached out to gather information about issues important to them and their families. By working with other organizations, businesses, and the UN offices in their region, the Millennials Movement brought the result of their service to the UN. This invaluable information helped to shape the SDGs. Rosa is also a gender equality advocate and was named a UN Women Empower Women champion. How do you make the world more peaceful and sustainable? You do it through education. Specifically, you develop a program for international virtual schooling, which directly connects schools through intercultural collaborative teaching and learning. Using instructional technology, students at all levels, from elementary to college, and from Asia, Europe, the Americas, and the Pacific, can study together and socialize on a web platform. The curriculum is UN supported. UNI designed it so young persons can develop respectful and compassionate relationships, a foundation to build peace. If you were at CETON's last conference at the UN, War No More, you remember the panel where she promoted the concept of empathy, compassion, solidarity, and cooperation, which she aims to instill in the students who are part of her program.
Melissa Fleming changed things. Melissa Fleming changed things. When she arrived at the Department of Global Communications, she was faced with the challenge of reaching millions of people in 60 countries. She decided to use every available media resource to deliver the UN's message. She captured the imagination of her viewers and listeners by telling stories of her colleagues who were serving in perilous situations. She said, "While it is our duty to highlight what is wrong with the world, we also have an opportunity to point out what is going right, what is possible, and how the United Nations is making a difference." We are honored that Ms. Fleming will join us on video and tell us how she faced a 21st century challenge and how she mobilized for change to accomplish her goals.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually, and to be among such esteemed company as this group of women leaders at the United Nations. I would like to thank the Committee on Teaching about the United Nations for giving me this opportunity to join you today. The title of this webinar, The Front Line of Change, applies especially to the field where I work, communications, which is undergoing transformative change around the world, much of it driven by new technologies. Content and how it is consumed is fragmenting. The digital age has shifted the balance of power from institutional gatekeepers to individuals. At the same time, we live in an era of deep social and political polarization. Budget cuts make it harder for traditional media outlets to carry out their work. Many also face sustained attacks from governments or corporate interests. Hate speech and misinformation are proliferating online. The challenges are enormous. At its core, my job isn't altogether different from yours. Every day in the UN's Department of Global Communications, we are tasked with informing people about the state of our world and also what the UN is doing to make it better. Yet there is growing evidence that this straightforward approach of raising awareness doesn't cut it anymore. If we're going to make an impact, we need to go beyond drawing people's attention to an issue. We must capture their imagination and provide examples of how those problems can be solved. The public is turned off by repeated messages of gloom and doom that do not offer a way forward. That's why, building on the work I had previously done at UNHCR, I introduced a new audience-focused approach to UN communications. It is centered around what I describe as the 3 W's of cause communications: what, why care, and what now. Now, through both our content and our outreach, we strive to position the UN as leading the narrative on global issues and solutions for a better world. By sharing trusted, authoritative information, we aim to spread knowledge and counter misinformation. A clear case in point is our Verified initiative. The UN launched Verified early last year as we realized that the COVID-19 pandemic was being accompanied by a simultaneous and very dangerous infodemic. That is, an infodemic of misinformation and disinformation about the virus. As we did this, we partnered with Purpose, a social mobilization organization, to create accurate and original content, also engaging content that goes out through our digital channels, penetrating the internet deep and wide and in multiple languages. We also share this content with more than 120,000 information volunteers who then share it with their own personal and professional networks. This is proving especially valuable as the focus of the pandemic shifts to vaccines. That takes care of the what, the informing people. But then comes the why care. In our communications, we focus on identifying and sharing people-centered stories that highlight solidarity, but also solutions, building hope and a sense of agency among our audiences. These individual stories make a positive difference, and they go so much further than the reams of statistics or generic stories that leave people feeling numbed into inaction. These kinds of individual stories build bridges of empathy. Inspiring people to care then takes us to the final W. What now? Once we've gained people's hearts, what are we going to ask them to do? Our goal is to mobilize, whether as individuals or as part of wider groups. The 3 W's, which form the basis of the UN Global Communications Strategy, shape the communications response to every issue the UN is working on, whether it's climate action or human rights or ending poverty, or resolving a conflict. One example that illustrates this new approach is something many of you might already be familiar with, Awake at Night. It is a podcast we began when I worked at UNHCR, and I have continued since I joined the UN Secretariat. Awake at Night has been a particularly emotional experience for me and a deeply rewarding one. Through it, I have had the opportunity to meet and interview extraordinary colleagues who have dedicated their lives to helping others, often in the most precarious and challenging and dangerous locations. The peacekeeper, for example, who was buried alive in Haiti, the refugee worker kidnapped for nearly a year in the North Caucasus, the envoy leading UN efforts to bring peace to Yemen, the UNICEF official on the front lines of the current COVID-19 crisis in India. Their stories are incredible, and the response from audiences has been remarkable. More than 2 million unique downloads just in this season, for example. And I've lost track of the messages I've received from inside and outside the UN about how much the episodes have not just moved them, but how they felt informed about the work of the UN. And, Awake at Night reminds us not just the power of these individual stories, but it also inspires people to want to do something that has purpose and to join forces working for the UN or supporting the values that the UN represents. Thank you very much for your time and all the best.
Hello, my name is Connie Rensink. The global goal, no hunger, is complex and requires systemic change and solutions that meet the current needs of today. Today, we are honored to have 3 women who are leading this work in different ways. Ismahani Aluafe is the Chief Scientist of Food and Agricultural Organization at the United Nations, and she is champion for girls and women leaders in food policy and as food scientists. Amy Wu, founder of From Farms to Incubators, where she is the founder of From Farms to Incubators, where she spotlights women innovators working to solve farming challenges. Crystal Montañez Baylor is the humanitarian coordinating hope for Venezuelan refugees and responding to food security. I have asked each of these women to introduce themselves and their work, and then we will have time for one question today. So I would like Ismahani to begin for us, please.
Thank you very much, Connie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks very much to Citron for this invitation to join this panel on no hunger. So no hunger has been really a dream for decades. We did very well for many years, and the numbers of people who suffer from hunger were going down. And then since 2015, unfortunately, the numbers started rising again. So let me share with you a little bit of numbers just to put it in perspective. Before COVID-19, about only 16 months ago, we had about 690 million people across the world that are undernourished and 3 billion that cannot afford a healthy diet. It's way too expensive for them. So unfortunately, this year, we get another maybe 130 million that may go hungry as a result of economic recession triggered by COVID-19. So obviously, we are not on track to achieve zero hunger by 2030. We are not on track to end hunger. We're not on track to achieve food security and improve nutrition. And we're not on track to promote sustainable agriculture. And that's where really we need a transformation. And that's where the UN Food Systems Summit is coming to play, because we do need a transformation if we're going to catch up and get to the target by 2030. And that's where FAO strategic framework is anchored. What we are aspiring to, it's a better production, better nutrition, better environment, better life for all. And all these aspirations could be reached only if we have a transformation to have a more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable agri-food system. And I do believe at the center of it, we need women. We need really to empower women and girls if we want to get to zero hunger world. And that's where I think really what women needs, in my perspective, is to have the same opportunities that were given to men for several centuries. So we need many destinies to catch up. And we need a critical mass of women leaders, not only one, not only 100, not only 1,000, not only 1 million. It should be about 50% of the population as we are. And that's where one of the things that I think women doesn't have yet, it's freedom. Freedom for me means a lot. For many people, it may mean independence, it may mean ability to speak freely, but for me, really, it's ability to choose in dignity and without fear. And I think really for women to get to that freedom and to execute that freedom, to have the right for freedom and execute it, they need to be educated. And that's where I'm very happy to be with you today, with educator talking about the power of education to really empower women, to make sure that they are ready to be involved in management, to be involved in policy making, to be involved in every single aspect of our life and decision. I grew up in Morocco with 6 sisters. So we were a very woman house. My dad was an educator and my mom never had chance to go to school, but both of them believed that education, it's the only way to make it. It's the only way to get us ready for the world. And I could never thank them enough, because by going through education and getting in science and technology and innovation and finding a passion for genetics, it took me in a wonderful journey over the last 49 years. And it made me really get to become the chief scientist of FAO. That's what I want to start with. Just to tell you a bit more about myself, after studying in Morocco, I was very, very curious about the world. And I wanted to travel. And then I took my education as a reason to travel. So I got a fellowship to do my PhD. And in my PhD, I traveled to so many labs to get to acquire the technology in molecular biology. And the more I traveled, the more I became more tolerant, the more I became more appreciative of diversity, the more I became more appreciative of knowing more not only from the lab or from the university, by really living with people from Latin America, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa. And really what I think we need social media is getting us more connected, interconnected, but in a very superficial way. What we need to, it's dig in details and get interconnected much more deeper, so we understand each other, we appreciate each other, and we work together really to get a better world for all. And the word dignity for me is a must. We should stop providing spoon feeding people. We need really to empower them so that they don't feel shy of themselves or of their kids because they're not able to feed them. So we need really a very inclusive environment to get to that status of nobody left behind and everybody with their dignity. Over to you, Connie. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismahani. Next, we'll hear from Amy Wu.
Thank you very much, Connie, for your introduction. I'm really honored to be here at the front line of change women leaders in the United Nations. So a little bit about myself is that I'm the founder and creator of From Farms to Incubators. We are a multimedia storytelling platform that covers agriculture and technology through the lens and the stories of women innovators in this fast growing space, especially women of color. And we have an award-winning documentary and now a book that profiles some 30 women in the space that was released earlier this month. A little bit about myself is that I am joining in from Hudson Valley, New York, which is pretty big with small farms here in New York State. And also my background is I'm a professional journalist. I was a journalist and investigative journalist for more than 20 years, although I don't want to say my age. So a bit about why it's important to tell stories about women in this space is that the uniqueness of this project that I have is that it uplifts the voices of women in this intersection of two sectors that are traditionally male dominated, agriculture and technology. It is good to have more women in the sector as it encourages the next generation of youth, hopefully more girls, to consider the many opportunities that ag and tech hold. Women already play a tremendous role in the area of food, whether it be in their households or on the farm. In fact, the farmer's wife is often more powerful in decision-making than the farmer, him or herself. So I was going to say that ag tech is really exciting because it requires a new knowledge and skill set, and also is a very knowledge-based workforce. And it can create a lot of more opportunities for girls and women, especially in the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. A lot of the women that I profile in the book, 30 plus, all of them have a very strong background in that area. And they also have a very strong passion for wanting to tackle big impact issues. So I was going to say that my conclusion in my research is there are many opportunities for youth, especially in rural and underserved communities that are very agricultural centric. And also ag tech is very exciting because it intersects with the local economy and policy and also education. So I was going to note that how does this connect with Zero Hunger? How does this connect with the No Hunger panel? Is that growers are facing a lot of problems and threats that come under climate change. Some of those include a lack of a severe labor shortage, women, not women, but rather water and land management issues. So ag tech is a solution for growers to grow more efficiently. And it's really helping them because it's critical. I mean, the population is estimated to be 10 billion by 2050. So it's really important that it plays an important role in helping farmers as well. I was going to say that what would it take to get more women in this exciting space? I feel mentorship, accelerators and incubators and programs, especially the K-12 level. So many opportunities for colleges and universities. Also, I also think it's important to for all of us women who work in this area, no matter what, whether it be in agriculture, policy, education, to consider being an advocate, meaning support other women in this space, whether it be sharing out their work, resharing their work. And these days, no matter where we are, we can do that digitally, maybe through our social media networks and so forth. So I'm a big supporter of that. And as I noted, mentorship as well, to whether it be unofficial or unofficial mentorship. And what's next from Farms to Incubators is we're looking for people who are passionate about uplifting women in ag tech, and would love to hear from more women in the space, and also would love to screen our film and also have more women discuss the work with younger women as well. So that's a little bit about myself and from Farms to Incubators. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you, Amy. And next we'll hear from Crystal Montañez.
Yes, thank you so much, Connie. It is an honor to chair this panel with extraordinary women leaders in the front lines of change. I'm going to begin with a brief description of the situation in my country of origin, Venezuela. Venezuelans are struggling to survive during the worst political and economic crisis in history caused by the Nicolás Maduro regime. The shortage of food and medicine, lack of essential services, a collapsed hospital system, no jobs, rising crime and corruption, and a minimum monthly salary equivalent to $3.50, only enough to buy a kilogram of cheese and a liter of milk per month, incredible, has forced 1 in 7 Venezuela to flee to neighboring countries, resulting in the largest displacement of refugees in the history of Latin America and the Western Hemisphere, and the biggest forced migration caused by dictatorship and corruption in the world, second only to the Syrian refugee crisis that has suffered from war for more than 8 years. Every day, thousands of Venezuelans stream into Colombia through trochas. These are improvised crossing trails along the Venezuelan-Colombia border. and it has become the only access between the two countries for Venezuelans traveling on foot, where they are exposed to extremely risky situations and a lot of vulnerability. This complex humanitarian crisis has worsened the food insecurity and hunger, affecting thousands of Venezuelan refugees, migrants, and workers, caminantes as they are known, in Colombia and the region. A fellow from the Rotary E-Club of Houston and I decided to take action to respond to this food insecurity and created the Hope for Venezuelan Refugee Project to help alleviate hunger affecting the Venezuelan refugees in the cities of Cucuta and Pamplona in Colombia. Containers of Rise Against Hunger meals were distributed to the food distribution centers and shelters serving this refugee population. Locally produced commodities were procured and distributed to help stimulate the local economy and hopefully expecting to help decrease the xenophobia towards the migrant population. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, the shelters in Colombia were closed following government protocols to prevent the spread of the virus. However, Venezuelans continue to escape from the lack of food and violence despite the global pandemic. In May 2020, our team initiated a campaign to help prevent the propagation of COVID-19 among the volunteers and the refugees, including the distribution of hot meals in disposable containers to the refugees in transit. Personal protection equipments, portable hand wash stations, thousands of face masks and disinfectant supplies were also distributed. More than 859,000 meals were distributed from the beginning of the Hope for Venezuelan Refugee Project in January 2019 until March 2021, when our international cooperation contract with our key donor ended, unfortunately. I would like for you to close your eyes for a second and just imagine a mother endangered by exhaustion and hunger, a crying child pulling what is left of her worn out shoe, as the mother begins to collapse under the weight of her bags, as she attempts once again to console the inconsolable. Her pangs of hunger have transformed from pain and fear to an excruciating hopelessness that presses into the bleeding blisters of every weary step. Like this, children, women, and men arrive daily at the food distribution centers and shelters after walking innumerable hours or even days. The hungry children cry as the parents unload their heavy bags, or what is left of the suitcases they have hauled for miles along very rough roads. Under this scenario, our team decided that we had to do something to continue our response to the hunger situation in the region. And in April 2021, just 2 months ago, we decided to initiate a soup meal program as part of the Hope for Venezuelan Refugee Project to continue, even though we don't have a key donor, but we are doing it. Once again, the volunteers are serving nutritious bowls of soup. And it's then, during that first heartwarming sip, that you catch a glimpse of the smiles emerging slowly and steadily, like a beautiful sunrise peering through the corners of quenched lips. This is hope. You can help by learning more about the Venezuelan refugee crisis and support our efforts to provide refugees with hope and the fundamental human right of access to food, because we cannot do this alone. Thank you, Connie. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal, for telling us your story and their story. So unfortunately, we have a very short period for our panel today, and I do appreciate each of you sharing your perspective and seeing the systemic solutions that we're finding, but also the on-the-ground work that is happening. I would like to close, and Amy, you referred to mentoring and telling stories. Ismahani, you talked about education, and I've heard you, Crystal, talk about the work that you're doing, but what can an educator do to empower girls and young women to step forward in your field? And so I'll start back with Ismahani.
Thank you, Connie. I'll go back that what we need to teach the kids, it's really the ability to analyze. And particularly when we talk about women and girls, where they live in difficult situation like the one that Crystal was mentioning, it's really providing them with the soft skills, providing them with the mentoring, providing them with the network, explaining how important you need to know your literature or science and biology, but you need also to know how to manage your career. You need to know how to make alliances, how to work in a team, how to attract success in many ways. And this will require many women club. So when we talk about leadership, there is a boys club. And that we recognize it, we don't recognize it, it exists. So what we need women clubs, and we need women to support women. And this has to go for, as I said, many, many decades to catch up. So, and with that, to support all of this, we need the right policies. We need policies that support women. We need policies that are pro-women, policies that are pro-girls. Even if we don't recognize it again, most of the laws we have are very, very old. Most of them are old by decades and centuries, and they were made in a time where man is the only player in the field. So we need really to dig out all of this. And I would like to really end up with the hope that my colleagues talked about. Many women live in very difficult situations. Many girls live in very difficult situations, and we need to give them hope. And that hope, it's through knowledge, it's through empowerment, it's through freedom to take a decision. So we need to instill that hope in our education. And I don't want to talk too much about education as is right now. It's not fit for purpose at all. We need a huge way to really review our education to provide those soft skills that I'm talking about, and to provide the girls and the women with the power to decide for themselves, to save themselves and save their kids, and to really execute their role in this world. We can't continue with half of the population being undermined and being not used enough and not used properly. Thank you, Connie.
Amy?
I want to echo a lot of what Ismahani just said. I thought that was fantastic. A couple of points that I would want to emphasize is certainly back to the mentorship and sharing stories part, and what can educators do. I think that start them young. I mean, from the time that a child is in kindergarten or even younger, and I'm coming again from this perspective of having focused in agriculture and technology, but build it in as part of the curriculum, on the spirit of entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation. And that can be in the format of programs or competitions or games and so forth, just having that from a very early age. And then I think in terms of mentorship, it's really important to have women like myself, I'll just put myself in there, to go speak at schools and to bring along some of these women who are sharing their stories. Because I remember being in, let's say, in 7th and 8th grade, and we had a career day and parents would come in and talk about what they do. I think it's important to see someone who of your gender who looks like you, or different diversity, and say, oh, that woman is doing this, and how did she get to where she is? So I think women who are already in a place in their career and who have gained some experience should step up and make themselves available to youth and younger people as well. So I feel strongly about that. And also building this into the curriculum, I think, is important, and looking at that from the top down as well. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there in mentorship, certainly.
Thank you so much. And Crystal, we'll end with you.
Yes, I believe that food security and gender inequality are closely linked to hydrangeas beginning at a very young age. And I would like to see educators to be very excited about empowering girls and young women in achieving that gender equality and recognizing that the access to food is a fundamental human right. Educators can help girls and young women realize their roles as farmers, entrepreneurs, leaders is extremely crucial to eliminate poverty and to ensure sustainable food security and nutrition for themselves and their families.
Thank you all for your time today. It really has been our honor to have you speak with us. And now I will pass it to my colleague, Peter Brosnan.
Hello. Our first of our last sections of, spotlights for today begins with Jayatma Wickramanayake. Jayatma was chosen in 2019 as one of Time Magazine's 100 World Leaders, and she acts as a representative and advisor to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. She works to increase the involvement of young people, especially girls and young women, in the inner workings of the UN. Jayatma says her purpose is not only to give young people a voice, but also to engage them and see them as an opportunity. The only woman to hold this position, she makes excellent use of the media. Her latest effort is #StopTheSame. She challenges young people to deliver real change, because if we keep doing things the same way, we are doomed. Tania Rosas is the founder of the El Jorgen Foundation, and she saw that her native country, Colombia, home to 370 million indigenous people, 70% of whom are young people, faced quite a challenge: how to re-educate those who had dropped out of a formal education. So she founded the El Jorgen Foundation. She works with educators and indigenous leaders to give at-risk students a second chance. Each new school it develops is adapted to the locale, language, and culture of the community. Using a hands-on curriculum with art, music, and literature, El Jorgen works to decrease illiteracy and extreme poverty. Currently, 500 new students sign up each year. Ms. Rosas and her work have been recognized by the Obama Foundation, the Young Leader of America Initiative, A Generation Changed by the U.S. Institute of Peace, as well as the Dalai Lama's office. Last but not least, Shomi Hassan Chowdhury. Shomi is the co-founder of Awareness 360, and she is a Samsung Global UNDP Generation 17 Young Leader. Born in Bangladesh, she came to America as an exchange student in her senior year of high school. As part of the curriculum, she was required to do 40 hours of community service. She completed 460. Inspired by this, her father's volunteer work, and her mother's untimely death, Shomi decided to focus her outreach on problems in her home country. She wanted to ensure that people had clean water, and that they understood the basic principles of hygiene. She delivered wash talks to vulnerable communities explaining, amongst other things, the proper techniques of hand washing. She co-founded Awareness 360, a worldwide organization to make all people aware of the global goals and other issues that need urgent attention. Now, she has 1,500 young people in 23 countries helping her carry out her goal. And now we return to Anne-Marie Carlson, Chair of CTAW.
Hi, I'm waiting for, here we go. We've presented some key women leaders during this webinar. We very much thank them for their many efforts and laud their accomplishments. We also thank our many registrants, 333 this afternoon from 14 countries. Plus, we thank our CTAW members, led by Vice Chairs Grace Murphy and Connie Rensink, for organizing and producing this webinar, and our technology experts, led by Executive Director Elizabeth Schumann and Director at Large Peter Brosnan, for their superb assistance. Since UN headquarters is now offering virtual tours along with speakers available to us all, our schools, students, and communities, we very much encourage you to pursue this new opportunity. These are 1-hour virtual tours, including a Q&A with the possibility of adding a briefing too. Do check out their website. Their website is tours unhq@un.org. I repeat that, tours unhq@un.org. Also check out the newly prepared resources list connected with this webinar on our CTON website. This is on the conferences page of our www.teachun website, where we have listed our 2021 webinars with recommended resources. And you'll also find more info on our speakers and key women leaders too. And please complete the survey, which will be sent by email to all registrants tomorrow. Your input very much helps us with future planning. And of course, stay tuned for future CTON events. Thank you for joining us today.